In the gray light of dawn, a quiet medieval village slowly stirs from slumber. The air is cool and still, carrying faint scents of earth and wood smoke. Inside a humble cottage with walls of timber and clay, a farmer awakens on his straw-filled mattress. Birds chirp outside as he sits up, feet touching the earthen floor. He reaches for a wooden basin that was filled the night before with water drawn from the village well. In these early hours, many medieval people begin their day with a simple ritual of washing, a gentle introduction of water to face and hands, wiping away the night's sleep. The farmer cups his rough hands and splashes the cold water onto his face. It is bracing but refreshing. Water trickles down, and he uses a small linen cloth to pat himself dry. Personal cleanliness, even if basic, is a part of life here. Despite the lack of modern bathrooms or plumbing, people understand the value of washing. Nearly everyone, from peasant to lord, knows the comfort of a morning rinse. It wakes the senses and cleans visible dirt and sweat that accumulated overnight. In an age without electric lights or alarms, the cool water on the skin is an invigorating start to the day. He next dips his fingers in the basin and carefully cleans around his eyes and inside his ears. Medieval texts of the time advise such attention each morning to clear away any buildup and maintain health. With a damp hand, he smooths his hair, which was cut short at the last village fair by a traveling barber. Combs are precious items, often carved from bone or wood, and he owns a small one. As the soft sunlight grows, he takes this comb and runs it through his hair and beard. It's not merely for neat appearance. It also helps dislodge lice or fleas that might have found refuge in the night. It's common for people to share their homes with these tiny pests, unwelcome but familiar companions in a world without effective pesticides. The farmer occasionally finds an itchy bite on his skin. Last evening, he sprinkled dried mint and lavender in the bedding straw, an old trick to ward off insects with pleasant-smelling herbs. Such herbal remedies are passed down through generations, small measures that bring comfort and a sense of cleanliness. Stepping outside into the dewy morning, the farmer feels the cool ground underfoot. At the village well, a couple of neighbors are already drawing water. He greets them quietly and waits his turn. Clean water is a precious resource for hygiene. Medieval villages are often built near springs, rivers, or wells, ensuring that fresh water is within reach for drinking, cooking, and washing. Hauling water is laborious, however, so every bucket is used thoughtfully. The farmer fills a wooden bucket and carries it back home. This will serve for his family's needs throughout the day. They will wash hands before the midday meal and again in the evening, following the custom that hands should be clean when breaking bread. Even without forks or spoons, most common folk eat with fingers and a hunk of bread as a trencher. There's an understanding that washing up is proper and polite. Back indoors, the farmer's wife is already up kneading dough for bread. She pauses to wash her hands and face with the water he brought. Their young children splash sleepy faces too, giggling at the chill. It's a small domestic scene of morning hygiene, repeated in countless homes across medieval Europe. Contrary to later myths of a filth-ridden Middle Ages, ordinary people do care about cleanliness in their daily routines, as much as their means allow. A simple basin of water each morning to cleanse the face, a rinse of the mouth, and cleaned hands before meals. These habits are ingrained, taught by parents, and even encouraged by health wisdom of the time. As the family prepares for the day's labors, they each take a moment to tend to themselves. The farmer uses a strip of coarse cloth as a towel to wipe his face and hands dry. Towels and soap are modest luxuries. Many peasants have only bits of old linen for drying. Soap, when available, is often homemade from animal fat and wood ash, lye. A small bar of such soap might be used for especially grimy hands, or occasionally when laundering clothes. For today's quick wash, water alone suffices. The faint scent of wood smoke clings to their clothes from the hearth fire, but the splash of water has at least washed away the night's sweat and dust. They feel awake and ready to face another day of work. Before he heads to the fields, the farmer pours the remaining water outside and cleans out the basin. He knows he'll come home sweaty and dirty by sunset. A more thorough wash might be needed then, perhaps a dip in the nearby stream if the weather is warm, or simply another basin bath at home. Medieval life, especially for laborers, is physically demanding. Dirt from fields, dust from roads, sweat from toil, these are constant, and so regular washing is necessary not just for comfort, but to prevent skin problems or infections. He has seen rash and sores afflict those who let grime build up too long. So he, like most of his neighbors, will rinse off the day's dirt in the evening as well, cleaning arms, legs, and feet with cool water and a rag. This commitment to basic hygiene, morning and evening, gives lie to the idea that medieval folk were utterly unconcerned with cleanliness. They may not bathe daily in the modern sense. Indeed, a full-body bath in a tub is a rare treat, but they are far from indifferent to dirt. On the contrary, they are keenly aware of it. Lice and fleas bite painfully, so one combs them out. Sweat and mud irritate the skin, so one rinses them off. Hands carry the grime of work, so one washes before eating. These habits form a quiet rhythm in the medieval day, as natural as breathing. In the soft glow of morning, as smoke begins to curl from cottage chimneys and villagers scatter to their tasks, a sense of modest freshness accompanies them. They have done what they can to start clean. As our journey through the Middle Ages begins, we carry with us this understanding. Medieval people lived in a world without running water or modern soap, yet they embraced small rituals of hygiene to bring comfort and health. It is the first step in unraveling the tapestry of medieval hygiene, thread by thread, in a story that will take us from humble farmyards to bustling cities, from bathhouses to monasteries, and into the halls of kings. With each step, we will see how people long ago strove to stay clean in body and spirit, in ways both familiar and wonderfully strange. Now, with the morning light spilling across the fields, we continue on to explore the art of bathing in medieval times. Chapter 1. Bathing and Personal Cleanliness. Picture a large wooden tub, half a barrel hooped with iron, sitting before the hearth of a medieval cottage. The fire crackles as water heats in an iron cauldron. It's a chilly evening, and a laborer has decided to indulge in a bath, perhaps the first in many weeks. Bathing in medieval times is a labor-intensive luxury for common folk. First, one must fetch many buckets of water from the well or river. Then, fuel, scarce and precious, must be burned to heat the water. The warm water is poured into the tub, steam rising as it fills. All of this effort means that a full bath is not a daily affair for most people. Yet when time, resources, or necessity allows, medieval people certainly do bathe and relish it. In this cozy cottage scene, the laborer tests the water with a finger, warm, not hot, since scalding water is thought to weaken the body. He steps in, knees drawn up in the small tub, and uses a jug to ladle water over his shoulders. With a sigh, he feels the warmth loosen tense muscles and soak away the grime of toil. For soap, he has a simple option, a bit of homemade lye soap, or perhaps just scrubbing with a coarse cloth. Soap in medieval Europe is typically made from animal fats, boiled with ashes to create a soft, caustic soap. It cleans, though it can be harsh on the skin. Wealthier households might have finer soap imported from places like Castile, an early hard white soap made with olive oil, or fragrant soaps from the Middle East. But our laborer's soap, if he uses any, is rudimentary. Often, people simply scrub with water and maybe sand or herbs for abrasion and scent. Bathing has an aspect of healing and relaxation beyond mere cleanliness. The warm water opens pores and soothes aches. Medieval physicians actually endorse bathing in moderation. It is known to cleanse the skin and was believed to purge the body of wastes that perspiration brought out. A 14th century Italian health manual notes that a bath cleans the external body of dirt and helps dissolve waste under the skin. People of the Middle Ages, contrary to the myth that they never washed, generally accept that cleaning the whole body is beneficial when it can be done. Guides to health, often written in Latin and vernacular verse for wider reach, encourage periodic bathing as part of a healthy regimen, alongside good diet and exercise. Still, because of the effort involved, most people cannot manage full immersion baths frequently. Common folk might aim for a bath once a week or a few times a month if possible, especially in summer when rivers and lakes invite a cooling dip. In winter, baths are far more scarce. The cold and the expense of heating water are strong deterrents. Monks in some orders were even prohibited from bathing more than a few times a year to promote asceticism. For example, records from Westminster Abbey indicate the monks were allowed baths only 4 times a year, around the major holy festivals. But those were strict guidelines of monastic discipline. In practice, many lay people bathed more often as needed or desired. Imagine now a different scene. Not a peasant's hut, but a prosperous merchant's house in a thriving medieval town. It's Saturday evening, a common time for a weekly bath in preparation for Sunday church. The merchant's servants bring a big wooden tub into a small private room near the kitchen for easy access to hot water. They hang linens around the room for privacy and to keep drafts out. Into the tub they lay a softened cloth or cushion for comfort, perhaps even a sponge to sit on. Water boiled with fragrant herbs, chamomile, rosemary, maybe a handful of rose petals, is poured in, mixing with cold to reach a pleasant warmth. A sheet draped overhead and around holds the steam, turning the corner of the house into a little bathhouse. The merchant steps into this warm oasis, and for a time he can soak and scrub at leisure. His wife might join him too. Sharing a bath was not uncommon for couples. In fact, depictions in medieval manuscripts often show husbands and wives bathing together in a large tub, a wooden plank across it, holding cups of wine or snacks. Bathing could be a social or family event, even a form of leisure. Parents bathed young children together, and adults might enjoy conversation and a drink while washing. There is a gentle intimacy to these scenes, faces flushed with warmth, the day's worries eased by the scented water. Such baths were often taken in the evenings, by firelight or candles, creating a soothing atmosphere after the day's labors. For those who lived in or near towns, public bathhouses were another option. Bathhouses had existed since Roman times, and though early medieval Europe lost many of the grand public baths of Rome, by the high Middle Ages, bathhouses had reappeared in cities and large towns. In some places, they were called stews, especially in England, or simply baths. These establishments offered heated tubs or pools, and often a steam room as well for a fee. They were frequented by travelers and locals alike. For example, 13th century Paris boasted dozens of public bathhouses. One resident complained jokingly that he was awoken each morning by the shout of the bathhouse attendants crying out on the streets, "The baths are hot," to entice customers. A 14th century manuscript illustration shows a couple bathing together in a large wooden tub. Communal baths were a popular social ritual, and people often bathed in pairs or groups, enjoying food, drink, and conversation as they soaked. Even in an age without modern plumbing, medieval folk found ways to make bathing a relaxing and pleasant occasion. Inside a town bathhouse, the atmosphere is warm, damp, and lively. Imagine stepping through a doorway from a chilly street into a steamy chamber. Wooden tubs line the walls, or in some cases, a sunken communal pool steams in the center. Men and women might bathe separately in some bathhouses, but many allow mixed bathing, especially for families or married couples. One might rent a private tub and have hot water brought by attendants, or share the public pool. People chat, business deals are discussed, friends laugh and splash each other gently. Some bathhouses serve simple meals or drinks. Wine and bathing pair pleasantly, it seems. In medieval Germany, there was a custom of bath feasts, where groups would dine and even hold celebrations at the bathhouse, sitting in warm water as they ate, turning the bath into a sort of rustic spa party. Bath attendants can also scrub your back or even perform massages. However, not all aspects of public baths were pure. The church grew concerned at times that mixed bathing could lead to immoral behavior. It was an open secret that some bathhouses doubled as brothels or places of rendezvous. A 13th century moralist listed bathing with one's spouse and others as an offense requiring penance, clearly worried about nudity and lust in these settings. Despite such warnings, medieval people continued to enjoy their baths. Authorities in many cities tolerated the bathhouse culture, reasoning that it was better to have an outlet for youthful lust in designated places than risk worse crimes. So the bathhouses thrived through much of the Middle Ages, regarded as places of cleanliness and inevitably of earthly indulgence. From the perspective of health, there were occasional fears about bathing. During times of plague or epidemic, some physicians cautioned against hot baths. The reasoning was that warm water opened the pores of the skin, which they believed could allow poisonous or corrupted air to penetrate the body. For instance, in the plague years of the 14th century, a few doctors advised avoiding baths and also avoiding looking at the sun or exerting oneself in hopes of not drawing in the deadly miasmas. Furthermore, a gathering of people in a steamy public bath might spread illness easily. So when plague stalked the land, bathhouses sometimes fell quiet. Yet in normal times, the medical consensus was that bathing was wholesome. It could even be medicinal. Specific baths were prescribed for ailments, herbal baths for skin conditions, hot baths to relieve aches or melancholia, or cold plunges to invigorate. Spa towns with natural hot springs, like Bath in England or thermal baths in parts of Italy and Germany, drew visitors seeking cures. There were elaborate guidelines on how to bathe for health, which season and time of day is best, what to eat or not eat before bathing, and what herbs to include for various benefits. By the late Middle Ages, many wealthy individuals had private baths at home. Kings and nobles led the way. King John of England, early 13th century, traveled with a personal bathtub and a bath attendant. Records show he took multiple baths in a year, far more than the average peasant could dream of. His great-grandson, King Edward III, installed a bathroom in the 1350s with taps that delivered hot and cold water, an extravagance using lead pipes and cisterns to provide running water in the palace. Noble ladies, too, enjoyed luxurious baths. A duchess might have a large tub lined with cloth and cushions filled with scented water. After soaking, she could be rubbed down with warm towels and anointed with fragrant oils. Bathing was sometimes a social ritual at court. There are accounts of nobility inviting guests to join them in ornate bathhouses or tubs, much as someone today might invite a friend to a sauna or hot tub. Even earlier, in the 8th century, the great Charlemagne was said to enjoy taking many people into the baths with him, not just family, but knights and attendants, turning his palace bath into a communal affair where up to 100 men might bathe together while conversing. We should note that for all its enjoyment and benefits, a full bath was still a special event rather than routine for most folk. Much of the time, people maintained cleanliness by more fragmentary methods. A sponge bath with a cloth and basin, washing only the most necessary parts: face, hands, feet, and underarms. There was even a saying known later as a night's bath, wiping oneself down with a cloth rather than immersing in water, something a busy or water-shy person might do. But given the chance, many would opt for the real thing: a tub of warm water, a bit of soap or herbs, and the feeling of being truly clean all over. As the medieval era came toward its close around the 15th century, public bathhouses actually began to decline. The reasons were a mix of morality and fear of disease. The spread of syphilis, the French disease, as it was called after 1490, made people wary of the freewheeling mingling in bathhouses, and more severe religious attitudes during the Reformation frowned on such potentially licentious environments. By the 16th century, observers like Erasmus lamented that bathhouses once so common had almost vanished in some regions. Ironically, people in the Renaissance and Baroque periods bathed even less often than their medieval predecessors, turning instead to heavy perfumes and linen shirts to keep clean without water. But in the High Middle Ages, our period of focus, bathing is very much alive and appreciated. In our journey, we see that medieval bathing encompassed a broad range. From the peasant scrubbing off dirt in a stream, to the elaborate steamy bathhouse feasts in town, to the scented private tubs of lords and ladies. It was never as frequent as today's daily showers, yet it held great importance. Bathing was a chance to relax, socialize, and rejuvenate, and to peel away the layer of grime that life inevitably deposited. As the laborer steps out of his tub by the hearth, drying himself with the linen sheet by the flickering fire, he no doubt feels both cleaner and lighter of spirit. Tomorrow he will return to the fields, but tonight he enjoys feeling truly washed. With the concept of bathing in mind, we can now move on to another intimate aspect of medieval hygiene, the care of one's teeth and mouth, a daily concern then as now. Chapter 2: Tooth Care and Dental Hygiene. After finishing a simple breakfast of bread and cheese, a medieval villager might conclude the meal with a curious routine. He takes a swig of water or wine, swishes it around in his mouth, and spits it out. This is his version of mouthwash, an instinctive act to clean the mouth of any remaining food. Dental hygiene in medieval times is rudimentary but not absent. People are aware that clean teeth and fresh breath are desirable. They have no plastic toothbrushes or minty toothpaste, yet they improvise with what nature provides: wooden sticks, cloth, herbs, and chalk. Picture a young woman of the town, perhaps the baker's daughter, as she cleans her teeth one morning. She has a small twig from a hazel tree. Hazel twigs are often used as a kind of toothbrush. She chews one end of the stick until the fibers separate into a little brush. Gently, she rubs this makeshift brush against her teeth, especially the front ones that show when she smiles. She then takes a clean piece of linen cloth, wraps it around a finger, and polishes each tooth, much as one might buff a piece of metal. This action removes the thin film that might have built up overnight or from yesterday's meals. Medieval writings advise to do this regularly. One text suggests rubbing teeth until they shine like ivory. If she is fortunate enough to have a tooth powder, she will apply a pinch of it. These powders are usually homemade mixtures of ground herbs and minerals. A common recipe might include salt, sage, and a bit of peppermint or mint leaves, dried and crushed. The mint provides a fresh flavor and fragrance. The salt and sage act as mild abrasives and antiseptics. Some might add powdered charcoal or chalk to help scour the teeth clean and perhaps whiten them a bit. One 13th century healer recommended herbs like marjoram and mint for cleaning teeth, but warned against using something too harsh or spicy, like certain hot spices, which he believed could corrode teeth, perhaps an early inkling that some substances harm enamel. After scrubbing, the young woman rinses her mouth thoroughly with water, swishing and gargling to carry away loosened debris. Spitting out the water, she feels her mouth refreshed. She might then chew on a fragrant herb for a minute, maybe a sprig of parsley, a clove, or a fennel seed. These herbs act as breath fresheners, masking any foul odors with a pleasant taste. Chewing fennel or anise seeds is fairly common, especially after a heavy or garlicky meal. Cloves are prized when available, not only for their aroma, but also for their numbing effect on toothaches. Medieval people are also familiar with toothpicks. At the dinner table, nobles and commoners alike sometimes use a small whittled sliver of wood or even an animal bone pick to dislodge bits of meat stuck between teeth. It's considered bad manners to pick one's teeth with a knife, so specialized picks were made. The wealthy might own silver or gold toothpicks, but most folks use simple ones carved from goose quills or twigs. A traveler often carried a personal grooming kit, which might include a tiny ear spoon for cleaning ears and a toothpick conveniently hanging from a belt. Despite these preventative measures, medieval people do suffer from dental problems. Cavities, both a gum disease and toothaches, are part of life. Diet plays a role. The average medieval diet, especially for the poor, contains plenty of coarse bread and gruel, which is actually less sugary than modern diets, and thus somewhat kinder to teeth. Refined sugar is a luxury imported item, and outside of the rich, few consume it regularly. Honey is used as a sweetener, but still not in huge quantities daily. So interestingly, severe tooth decay might have been less rampant in a medieval village than it became in later centuries when sugar consumption soared. Nevertheless, grain-based diets can leave phytic acid that weakens enamel, and bits of stone from grinding mills often mix into bread, causing teeth to wear down. By middle age, many people's teeth are worn flat from chewing bread made with rough millstone bits, and gums might recede. When a toothache strikes, remedies range from the practical to the mystical. As pain sets in, one might rinse the mouth with warm salt water or wine. Wine has alcohol and could slightly disinfect and numb. Herbal pastes are applied to aching gums. Crushed garlic or onion, believed to draw out bad humors, or a paste of pepper, mint, and vinegar. Clove oil, if known, is an excellent analgesic. Some might chew a clove directly against a sore tooth for relief. A popular belief is that a toothworm causes cavities and pain. To smoke it out, one remedy advises heating seeds of henbane on a metal pan and funneling the smoke into the mouth toward the bad tooth, hoping to kill or expel the imagined worm. The henbane smoke, containing mild narcotic properties, might actually dull the pain temporarily, reinforcing the practice. If the toothache becomes unbearable and the tooth is rotting, many will reluctantly seek out the barber surgeon or a local tooth drawer. This person, often a barber by trade, since barbers handle minor surgeries and bloodlettings in addition to haircuts, will perform a rudimentary extraction. The prospect is terrifying. There is no anesthetic beyond perhaps a swig of strong wine or biting on a piece of leather. The tooth drawer uses a tong-like metal instrument to grasp the offending tooth and yank it out with brute force. Often done in the marketplace or during fairs as a spectacle, such extractions are quick but excruciating. Still, for a person who has endured nights of throbbing pain, the sudden relief, after the shock, can feel miraculous. They might bleed and be sore for days, but the source of agony is gone. The extracted tooth might even be shown off by the practitioner as proof of his skill or kept by the patient as a grim souvenir. Of course, prevention is preferable to such a fate, so people try to keep their mouths clean. Breath was a concern, especially in social settings. A nobleman at court, hoping to make a good impression, might chew on a blend of spices and herbs wrapped in a tiny cloth, somewhat like a sachet, to perfume his breath before speaking with lords and ladies. Medieval texts on courtesy warn against having foul breath or rotting teeth visible. They encourage rinsing the mouth and even mention cleaning between teeth with a quill. In one courtly etiquette guide, Diners are told not to pick teeth with their knives and to wipe your teeth with a cloth after eating so no food remains to rot or cause bad odor. One fascinating recommendation from a Salernitan health text from the famous medical school of Salerno is that on waking, one should rinse the mouth and wash away the night's phlegm, then rub the teeth and gums with a dry cloth. The dryness was thought to firm up the gums and keep them healthy. If one's gums bleed or are inflamed, gingivitis was common due to lack of flossing. There were tinctures to apply, sage and salt and wine as a mouthwash, or powdered myrrh and cinnamon rubbed on to strengthen gums. For whitening teeth, some medieval folks attempted various techniques. A recipe for a teeth whitening powder might include ground pumice or burnt rosemary mixed with vinegar and abrasive scrub. However, overuse of harsh agents could damage the enamel. Generally, truly white teeth were rare, but having relatively clean and ivory-colored teeth was a sign of beauty and health. The Welsh, as one chronicler remarked, were diligent teeth cleaners and often had impressively bright teeth. This suggests that regional habits varied. Perhaps in some areas people placed more importance on dental care than in others. Bad breath, known then as fetor of the mouth, it was sometimes linked to digestive issues. One medieval remedy for chronic halitosis involved focusing on the stomach. A tonic of wine mixed with herbs to cleanse the stomach was prescribed under the belief that bad breath came from corrupt vapors rising from the gut. Another remedy specifically from the text Trocula, a medieval women's health compendium, suggests boiling mint and other pleasant herbs in wine and using it as a mouth rinse, while also treating any underlying stomach disorder with gentle laxatives or emetics. This approach shows the holistic view of medieval medicine. Oral health wasn't isolated, but connected to overall bodily humors. Despite efforts, many middle-aged and elderly medieval people had missing teeth or dental issues. Portraits of peasants in later art often show gaps in their smiles. Tooth loss by the 40s or 50s was common. People adapted by chewing on the other side, or consuming softer foods like pottages if their teeth were weak. It was just a part of aging in their minds. Let's imagine a more upscale scenario. A noblewoman in her solar, a private chamber, going through her morning routine. Alongside her ladies-in-waiting, she opens a tiny ivory box containing a tooth powder that smells of mint and cinnamon. Dipping a damp linen cloth into it, she rubs her teeth delicately. She then takes a sip of spiced wine, swishes it around, and swallows or spits discreetly into a bowl. One of her attendants brings a polished silver mirror, a luxury item, so she can inspect her smile. Satisfied that her teeth are clean and her breath sweet, she proceeds with the rest of her grooming. In her jewelry box, she even has a small gilded toothpick dangling from a chain, functional and decorative. She wears it on her belt so that after the evening banquet, she can retire to a corner and use it to remove any stubborn bits of meat between her teeth, maintaining her refined appearance. This attention to dental hygiene among the wealthy sets an example that trickles down as well. While peasants cannot afford cinnamon or mirrors, they observe that caring for one's mouth is part of personal upkeep. So even a poor shepherd might chew on a fresh green twig daily to scrub his teeth, or an artisan might rinse his mouth after lunch and be careful not to crack walnuts with his teeth for fear of breaking them. They used little metal nutcrackers for that. By exploring medieval tooth care, we see once again that the people of this era were not indifferent to cleanliness or health. They lacked the science to prevent cavities effectively and dreaded dental pain as much as we do. Their solutions were humble: herbs, cloth, wood, and wine. In the quiet mornings or after meals, these small acts, the swish of water, the scrape of a twig, the soothing chew of mint, were part of daily life. In a world without dentists on every corner, prevention and simple remedies were all one had to avoid the nightmare of a severe toothache. As we leave this topic, imagine our medieval friend, after finishing her tooth cleaning ritual, smiling with a sense of freshness. It's a small boost of confidence and comfort as she steps out to face the day. Now, with a clean mouth and having looked at personal routines, let's widen our perspective. We will travel from individual habits to the broader environment, into the streets of medieval cities and the lanes of rural villages, where the challenges of public cleanliness and sanitation loom large. Chapter 3: Cleanliness in Medieval Cities versus Rural Areas. Our journey next takes us to two very different settings: the bustling narrow streets of a medieval city and the open, earthy lanes of the countryside. How did hygiene and sanitation compare between these worlds? Let us wander first through a medieval city, say London or Paris in the 14th century, and then through a quiet rural village, observing the sights, smells, and efforts, or lacks thereof, to keep these environments clean. In the city, life is crowded and lively. We find ourselves on a busy street just after dawn. The street is narrow, flanked by timber-framed houses that lean in, upper stories almost touching overhead. The ground underfoot is not paved, but a mix of dirt and the remnants of yesterday's activities. A pungent odor greets the nose, a blend of smokes, stale refuse, human and animal waste, and the tang of cooking fires. Medieval cities often have a reputation for filth, and indeed, the challenges are immense. Thousands of people live in close quarters, without modern garbage collection or sewage systems. Yet city dwellers are not entirely passive about the mess. There are rules and people who attempt to manage the chaos, albeit with varying success. As we walk, we must watch our step. There is a central drainage channel running down the middle of the street, or sometimes along one side. This shallow gutter carries wastewater, the dirty water thrown out from homes after washing dishes or clothes, and unfortunately often more foul wastes as well. A housewife appears at an upper window and empties a bucket with a call of warning, something like "Gare l'eau," French for "watch out for the water," or in English, "Gardez-l'eau," from which it is said the nickname "loo" for toilet later came. We step aside just in time as a splash of murky liquid hits the street and flows into the gutter. This was the chamber pot from the night, its contents now being sent off. Technically, many cities have ordinances against dumping filth into the street, at least during daytime, but not everyone obeys, especially if no city guard is around. Walking further, we see piles of horse droppings, inevitable, since horses are primary transport and there's no one constantly cleaning after them. Perhaps a street sweeper hired by the town will shovel some of it later, or rain will wash it into the drains. Stray dogs sniff at the refuse, looking for edible scraps. Occasionally, a pig might trot by. In some medieval towns, pigs roam freely, acting as informal garbage disposals, though they too add to the mess. We pass a butcher's stall beginning its work. Blood from the slaughter of animals might trickle out, and awful, undesired animal parts could end up tossed in the gutter if not collected for rendering. The fishmonger a few doors down has a heap of fish scales and innards to discard. One hopes he will carry it to the river later rather than let it rot out front. The city does make some organized attempts at sanitation. Local authorities from the 14th century onwards often appoint rakers or muck collectors to gather trash and dung. We might see a man with a cart and shovel going by, calling for people to bring out their rubbish. These rakers will take the waste outside the city walls to designated dumps or pits. It's a foul job, but the pay is decent due to its unpleasantness. Late at night, another crew, the gong farmers, gong being an old word for privy, might come to empty cesspits and latrines in the wealthier homes or inns that have them. Under cover of darkness, they dig out the noisome sludge and cart it away, often selling it to farmers as fertilizer. In fact, human waste as fertilizer is a known practice. What is useless in town becomes valuable in the countryside to enrich soil. Of course, this is hazardous work with primitive tools and no understanding of pathogens. The gong farmer's life is smelly and risky, but someone has to do it. They typically work after midnight and must haul their loads beyond city limits by dawn. We notice that some efforts have been made to keep the city cleaner. On this street, a sign on the wall, for those who can read, reminds residents that each household must sweep the stretch of street before their house weekly by order of the council. In a few spots, we indeed see freshly swept areas, and maybe even a bucket of clean water thrown to settle the dust. Civic pride and fear of fines motivate a measure of tidiness, at least in front of one's shop. In a particularly well-regulated town like Nuremberg or Coventry, ordinances ban people from dumping waste in certain public waterways or streets under hefty penalties. Such rules indicate both the severity of the problem and the attempts to curb it. One feature of medieval cities designed for public health are the conduits and fountains that provide fresh water. Turning a corner, we come upon a stone fountain where several townsfolk line up with buckets. This fountain is fed by a lead pipe that brings water from a spring outside the city. Medieval engineers and masons create these water systems to ensure the populace has safe water to drink and use, reducing reliance on possibly contaminated river water. The fountain square is actually a relatively clean area. Spilled water keeps the ground rinsed, and people tend to avoid contaminating their own water source. City officials often protect fountains. Some even had them covered or appointed guards to prevent misuse, like washing clothes directly in them, which was sometimes banned. In 15th century London, such conduits were cherished communal assets, decorated during festivals and carefully maintained. Despite these measures, the sheer volume of waste often overwhelms medieval cities. We cross a small bridge over what looks like a brook, but the nose tells otherwise. This is actually an open sewer, a stream that has become the outlet for much of the neighborhood's refuse. Many cities were built along rivers, which sadly became carriers of pollution. But in the medieval mind, dilution is the solution. The flowing water will carry away the impurities, and hopefully out of sight and out of mind. Downstream, of course, others will suffer the consequences. For example, in Paris, upstream sources of water were preferred for drinking, while downstream, sections of the Seine closer to the city's output were notorious for filth. We might peek into a backyard through an open gate and see a cesspit being dug. In urban houses that have a bit of yard, a cesspit, lined with brick or stone, collects toilet waste from privies. When it fills up every so often, the owner must hire those gong farmers to empty it. If neglected, it can overflow, leaching horrid smells and contaminating nearby wells. People know the stink is unhealthy. They associate foul odors with disease, the miasma theory. So unpleasant smells are not just aesthetic offenses, but health dangers in their view. That's why many will burn incense or herbs in their homes, hoping the sweet smoke will counteract corruption in the air. In churches, thick incense clouds not only venerate the divine, but also practically mask the odors of crowded congregations and are thought to purify the atmosphere. As noon approaches in our imaginary city walk, the streets grow busier and perhaps marginally cleaner. A guild of apprentices might have swept a pathway for their master's customers, and midday collection carts have taken some rubbish out. Yet the underlying issue remains. Waste accumulates faster than it can be removed. Come heavy rain, these streets will turn into foul rivers, washing refuse into the nearest waterways or pooling dangerously. Flooding is a dreaded event, often leading to contamination of wells and the spread of disease, since it stirs up the filth and brings it into contact with people's living spaces and drinking sources. Now, in contrast, let's journey outward to the countryside. We travel down a winding dirt road flanked by fields and hedgerows until we reach a small hamlet. Only a few dozen people live here, in simple wattle and daub cottages with thatched roofs. The first thing we notice is the air. It smells of soil, grass, and livestock. There is a manure pile behind one house that gives off a familiar barnyard aroma. But compared to the city, the smell is gentler, more natural. In rural areas, animals and humans live in close proximity too, but the wastes are generally recycled into the environment in a beneficial way. The manure heap we see is deliberate. Farmers collect dung from their cattle, sheep, and pigs, and even their own night soil at times, into a compost heap, which will later be carted to the fields as fertilizer. This keeps it from lying about everywhere and turns it into black gold for crops. There are no paved streets or gutters here, just trodden paths. When it rains, the paths become muddy, but the mud is mostly earth, not the cocktail of refuse we found in the city. There are fewer people, so less garbage overall. Kitchen scraps might be fed to pigs or chickens immediately, or tossed on the dung heap. The concept of backyard midden is common, a designated pit or heap near each home for tossing broken pottery, bones, and other non-usable waste. Over time, these middens build up and can be mined for fertilizer or left to compost. We approach the village well at the center of the hamlet. It's a crucial lifeline and is treated with respect. The villagers understand that if the well is fouled, everyone suffers. Therefore, they are cautious not to let their latrines or waste dumps be too near the well. Often, Latrines, if any, are dug at the edges of the village or behind houses farthest from the well. Some villages don't have formal latrines at all. People might go in the woods or fields, especially if the village is extremely small and surrounded by ample land. While this sounds messy, it actually can be safer for the water supply than having concentrated pit toilets close by. The sun and soil naturally break down dispersed waste, and it fertilizes the wild plants. Bathing in the countryside is largely a private family affair. Without public bathhouses, peasants use rivers, ponds, or tubs at home. On a warm summer day, children might splash in the stream that waters the livestock. Adults will take the opportunity to wade in and scrub themselves too, perhaps wearing a light shift or simply being mindful of modesty if others are around. After a day harvesting hay, the itch of sweat and chaff on skin is unbearable. A rinse in the creek offers relief. In winter, families heat water on the hearth and fill a small tub indoors. They often share the bathwater sequentially. There's an old saying warning not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, implying the water gets so dirty after multiple bathers that one might not see even a baby in it. This hints at the reality. When a whole family bathes, one after another, in the same water to save effort, by the end it is murky indeed. Still, everyone ends up cleaner than before. An interesting aspect of rural life is the proximity to animals. Many peasants keep chickens that wander in and out of the house, pigs in pens just outside, and cows or goats that might be housed under the same roof in a separate stable area during winter. This means floors can get dirty quickly with tracked-in manure or stray feathers. A common practice is to cover earthen floors with rushes or straw, which absorb spills and droppings. The cleanest houses change these rushes periodically, adding sweet-smelling herbs like thyme or meadowsweet to the mix. In a well-kept peasant home, the fresh rushes give off a pleasant, hay-like fragrance, masking the less pleasant odors. However, not everyone changes the floor rushes often. Some may let them sit for months, in which case they rot and harbor fleas. It really varies by household diligence. One might assume that the countryside, being greener and more open, automatically means better hygiene. In some ways, yes, there's more space for waste to decay harmlessly, more access to running water for cleaning, and fewer people to spread illness quickly. But rural life has its own challenges. Wells can be contaminated by nearby outhouses if not carefully placed. Farm workers are in constant contact with animal manure, barefoot sometimes, leading to parasitic infections or tetanus if they get cuts. Many villages lack any latrine and use the fields, which is fine until a heavy rain washes that into the stream or someone drinks downstream. The knowledge of germ theory is absent, so a farmer might not realize that digging a privy pit uphill from the well is dangerous, though over generations, some empirical wisdom guides them to put smelly pits where water doesn't flow toward drinking sources. Pest control in the country is a double-edged affair. On one hand, houses are simpler and sometimes drafty, making it a bit harder for vermin infestations to explode, since there's not the huge abundance of hiding spots as in city multi-story buildings. On the other hand, living amidst nature, villagers constantly battle mice, rats, attracted to stored grain, and fleas on dogs or livestock. Cats are cherished for their role in catching rodents. We might see a cat lounging near a granary door, employed as an unofficial sanitation worker to keep grain stores clean of vermin. Likewise, in stables, people spread herbs to discourage flies and fleas from tormenting the animals and themselves. A remarkable contrast between city and countryside is in times of plague or epidemic. Some rural areas fare better simply because the population is sparse, reducing transmission. Also, a cleaner environment with less filth may have marginally fewer disease vectors, like rats or contaminated water, that breed illness. Chronicles note that remote villages sometimes escaped the Black Death while cities were ravaged. However, rural communities had far less access to medical help or diversity of food. Poor nutrition can lower immunity. So if disease did arrive, they suffered greatly too, sometimes whole villages perishing due to isolation and lack of care. Clean water is generally easier to come by in the country. Springs, rivers, and rainfall cisterns are accessible. Villagers often know which stream is safe for drinking versus which is downstream of a pasture. In many places, they fetch water upstream for drinking and use downstream parts for washing laundry or watering animals. This basic separation helps maintain water quality for consumption. In contrast, a city might only have one river running through, forced to serve for drinking, washing, and waste removal altogether, a much worse scenario if not managed. Now consider also the psychological aspect of cleanliness. A city dweller sees so much filth that they might become inured to it or overwhelmed by it. A country dweller sees the cycles of nature handling waste, fertilizer to crops, etc., and might feel more agency in keeping their immediate home clean because they directly use the waste productively. Villagers also often bathe outdoors in summer without shame, with appropriate modesty if needed, because nature provides the facility freely. In a city, one must pay for a bath or find a private spot, making bathing more of a luxury event than a casual cool-off. As we conclude this comparison, imagine a twilight scene. In the city, as night falls, householders toss the last slop of the day into the street, and a haze of smoke from thousands of hearths mixes with the smell of refuse hanging under the starry sky. In the countryside, night brings a quieter scene. Crickets chirp, the air smells of dew, and the only smoke is from the few cottage chimneys, blending with the scent of hay and the nearby forest. Both environments have their dirt and their cleanliness, their own rhythms of hygiene. Neither is a sanitary paradise by modern standards, but each has strategies adapted to its context. We have walked the filthy alleys and the muddy lanes, seeing how medieval people coped with waste and water in different settings. This sets the stage to examine more closely some specific places in medieval society where hygiene was of particular concern or interest. Let us venture next into the castles and manor houses of the nobility, where one might expect higher standards of cleanliness, and indeed find both innovations and surprising shortcomings in the quest to stay clean and comfortable. Chapter 4. Hygiene in Castles and Courtly Life Travel, now to a great stone castle perched on a hill. As we cross the drawbridge and pass under the iron portcullis, we enter a world of lords and ladies, knights and attendants. One might think that in such splendid halls, filth and discomfort were banished. The reality, however, is that while castles boasted some advanced hygiene features for their time, they were not immune to the challenges of medieval living. Let's stroll through a castle's courtyards and chambers, observing how the noble residents managed water, waste, and personal cleanliness behind thick fortress walls. Our first stop is the castle well, often located in the central courtyard. Many castles were built with deep wells to secure a water supply even during sieges. At a castle like Beeston in England, the well plunges over 100 meters down to reach water, a remarkable engineering feat. Servants draw bucket after bucket to supply the castle's daily needs. Water from the well is prized for drinking and cooking. For washing, they might also collect rainwater. We see a system of stone gutters along the rooftops channeling rain into a cistern. Some castles have rudimentary plumbing. Lead or hollow wood pipes convey water from a cistern on a tower down to the kitchen or even to a noble's private chambers. In Chester Castle, for instance, pipes once carried water to different parts of the keep. It's impressive to consider. A lord could turn a spigot of sorts and have water flow into his basin, a medieval convenience available only to the wealthy and well-fortified. Inside the castle's keep, we enter the great hall. The floor is strewn with the reeds and sweet-smelling herbs, just like in peasant homes, but here maintained by a whole staff of servants. Castles can be drafty and cold, so tapestries hang on walls to reduce dampness and dust. Cleanliness is partly a matter of appearances in such spaces. The high table gleams with polished silver, and the floor rushes are changed relatively often, perhaps every couple of weeks, to keep odors at bay for the Lord's guests. We notice large basins on stands near the entry. These are for hand washing before meals. In noble households, it's customary that before sitting down to dine, guests and residents wash their hands. A squire or page might pour perfumed water from a pitcher over each person's hands as they hold them over a basin, while another attendant offers a towel. This ritual is both hygienic, everyone eats with fingers, and a sign of refinement. After the meal, finger bowls or another washing round is offered to rinse grease away, an important courtesy when sharing dishes. Now, let's ascend a spiral stair to the private chambers. We reach the ladies' solar, a sunny upper room where the noblewoman of the castle spends her day. Her chamber is equipped with some remarkable items for personal hygiene. In one corner, screened by a decorated folding partition, stands a wooden bathtub, stored upright when not in use. It's a finely made tub, even padded with a quilted lining for comfort. When the lady desires a bath, servants will bring heated water, probably from the kitchen fires, in big cauldrons, fill the tub in her solar, and drape sheets around for privacy and warmth. The bath water might be sprinkled with rose petals or a few drops of aromatic oil for luxury. After bathing, the lady steps out onto a thick mat. Her maids wrap her in warmed linen towels. They then help her don a fresh shift that has been aired out and lightly perfumed. This is bathing at its most elegant in medieval times. A far cry from the peasant family tub by the hearth. The castle affords not only the tub and space, but also an entourage of helpers to make the experience nearly spa-like. Aside from the tub, we notice the ladies' vanity table, a polished bronze mirror. Glass mirrors are extremely rare, combs of ivory and boxwood, and earthenware jars containing creams and cosmetics. Here is evidence of grooming and cleanliness. A jar of complexion wash made from herbs and rainwater, a little box of charcoal and cloves for sweetening the breath when rubbed on teeth, and fine linen strips she uses to bind her hair at night to keep it neat and perhaps cover it, as medieval belief held that night air could be harmful. She also has a small scissors and razor for shaping eyebrows or removing unwanted hair. Noblewomen sometimes plucked their hairline to achieve a fashionable high brow. Clearly, much attention is given to appearance and cleanliness of the body among the nobility. Now, nature's call brings us to one of the castle's most notorious yet essential features, the garderobe or castle privy. We locate one along the outer wall, a little closet-like room jutting out over the castle's edge. Inside, a stone or wooden bench has a hole opening downward. If we peer, holding our breath, through the hole, we see daylight, a straight drop down the castle wall to the base far below. The design is simple. Waste falls by gravity away from the living quarters. Ideally, the chute empties into the castle's moat or a deep pit. In some castles, a diverted stream or moat water would help carry the sewage away, creating a primitive flush. The Tower of London, for example, had garderobes positioned on an outer wall facing the Thames, so the river might wash the refuse away, out of sight of the city. A typical medieval castle garderobe, toilet, built into the thick stone wall of the fortress, as seen at the Tower of London. The small chamber contains a bench seat with a hole, allowing waste to drop down a chute to the outside ground or moat below. Such privies kept unpleasant smells and filth out of living areas, and were considered a luxury of castle life, despite their simplicity and often drafty chill. These castle privies were a mark of status. Most ordinary homes did not have a dedicated indoor toilet space. However, they were far from pleasant by our standards. The garderobe might be drafty, which helped ventilate smells at least, and one had to be careful. There are tales of the occasional mishap, from people falling in, rare thanks to benches, to intruders trying to sneak in through the openings. In fact, castle designers sometimes installed metal grates in the privy chutes to prevent an enemy from climbing up into the castle via this literal weak point. Still, during sieges, the privy could be a smelly vulnerability, waste accumulating if it couldn't drop into water. One intriguing aspect of garderobes is their dual use as closets for clothes. The very word garderobe comes from French meaning to guard your robes. In a bizarre twist, clothes and linens were often hung or stored in the privy chamber. Why? Because the strong ammonia fumes from the decomposing urine and excrement were believed to repel pests like moths, fleas, and lice from the fabrics. It's an example of medieval practical ingenuity. Turn a foul necessity into a pest control measure. Indeed, some sources indicate that fine garments kept near the privy stayed relatively bug-free, thanks to this pungent atmosphere. It sounds odd, but with no mothballs or modern repellents, ammonia from waste was a natural, if stinky, deterrent. Castle life also necessitated chamber pots, despite having garderobes. At night or in winter, one might not want to trek through cold corridors to the privy, so chamber pots were used in bedrooms. In the morning, these were discreetly emptied, often by a lower servant or a gong farmer, into the cesspit or over the wall if regulations were slack. In terms of general cleanliness, castles had servants assigned to tasks like washing linens, sweeping floors, and keeping the hearths clean. Laundry in a castle was a big operation. Undergarments, shirts, and bed linens from a large household could be numerous. Washerwomen employed by the castle would take loads of laundry to the nearest river or to large tubs to soak. Some castles had a laundry house near the water source. They used lye soap or urine to loosen stains and then beat the cloth with paddles. After rinsing and drying, sometimes by hanging in an airy loft or courtyard, linens would be pressed smooth and stored. Nobles loved fresh, scented linens. One could impress a guest by offering a bed with sheets that smelled of lavender. A well-run castle prided itself on such details as part of its hospitality. Pest management in castles was ongoing. We already saw the use of herbs and guard-robes to deter insects. Additionally, castle residents might have their hair regularly inspected for lice by their attendants. Shaving the hair of men could help. Monks shaved their tonsure daily, partly for cleanliness too, but most secular lords had hair. Combs and fine-toothed lice combs were employed frequently. Beds posed a major challenge. Even the richest feather bed could harbor fleas or bed bugs. Noble beds were lavish, with thick mattresses, curtains, and blankets, which ironically gave bugs more places to hide. As a countermeasure, bedding was taken out periodically, hung in sunlight. Sunlight can kill or drive away some pests, and beaten to knock out dust and vermin. Some aristocrats even had their bed frames designed to be taken apart so the joints could be cleaned and scalded if needed. And still, stories persisted of kings and queens being bitten by fleas in their sleep, a reminder that in the Middle Ages, biting insects were the great equalizer, afflicting poor and rich alike. Within the castle's kitchen and dining practices, we see further hygienic thought. Meat and fish were salted to preserve them and to prevent spoilage. Spoiled food could cause illness, even if they didn't know about bacteria. Spices were not only for flavor, but possibly to cover any slight off-tastes from aging food. The floor rushes in the hall were regularly changed because rotting food scraps falling into them could become intolerable. Some castles had mosaic or tile floors, especially later medieval, in key areas which were easier to sweep clean than bare earth or plank floors. Those were often scrubbed with water and straw brooms. After feasts, servants collected leftover scraps into buckets, some to feed castle hounds or pigs, some to give as alms to the poor at the gate. Not exactly hygienic recycling, but waste not want not, and the rest to dump far from the castle to avoid stench. Interestingly, monarchs and high nobles often traveled from one residence to another frequently, partly as a means to manage hygiene. A castle or palace occupied by a full court, hundreds of people, including servants and guests, would get very dirty over time. By moving periodically, it gave the staff time to do a thorough cleaning and let the place air out and recover from the latrines and kitchens being overtaxed. For example, the English kings rotated between several palaces. While one was being heavily used, another got a break and a cleaning. We cannot leave the castle without peeking into the infirmary or chapel, where cleanliness took on a spiritual or medical dimension. Castles sometimes had a small infirmary for sick residents. Here, maintaining cleanliness was seen as part of healing. washing wounds with wine or boiling water to cleanse them, and keeping the patient's linens clean. They didn't know about germs, but they did notice that filthy wounds fared poorly. In the chapel, a lavabo, water basin, stood for the priest to wash his hands ritually before Mass, symbolizing inner purity, but also practically cleaning hands. Holy water stopes at the chapel entrance allowed worshippers to wet their fingers and cross themselves. Some might have seen it as a small protective wash as well, though ironically shared water could spread germs. They wouldn't have realized that. In the shimmering banquet held in the great hall that evening, we would see the culmination of courtly hygiene and etiquette. The lord and lady, bathed and bedecked in clean garments, preside over a meal where every guest's hands and face are expected to be clean. Servants circulate with ewers of rosewater to refresh diners' hands between courses. The floor is relatively clean thanks to fresh rushes laid that morning. While bones might be tossed to the hounds, overall the scene is one of controlled order. A guest spilling wine or making a mess is considered uncouth. Tidiness at table is a mark of noble upbringing. A medieval advice book might remind a young courtier to not blow your nose with your bare hands, nor on these tablecloth, and turn away to sneeze, then wash your hands. Good manners and hygiene overlap significantly in this refined setting. Thus, within castle walls, we find a microcosm of medieval hygiene efforts. Sophisticated water systems, private baths, flushing latrines of a sort, perfumed living spaces, and diligent servants all combine to create an environment that strives for comfort and cleanliness in an era that makes it difficult. And yet, not all is pristine. Vermin persist, illness can spread, and the moat doubling as sewer can smell ghastly on a summer day. But for the time, a well-kept castle was likely one of the cleanest places to live. Having seen how the nobility lived, we will next turn to a different sphere of medieval life, one where communal living and spiritual values intersected with cleanliness, the monasteries and convents. In those religious communities, discipline and routine governed even bathing and sanitation. Let us quietly enter a monastery's cloister and see how monks and nuns balanced their vows with the practical need for hygiene. Chapter 5. Monastic Cleanliness of Life in Monasteries and Convents. We step now into the hushed world of a medieval monastery. The air is calmer here, filled with the scent of incense and beeswax candles. Monks in simple habits move slowly along cloister pathways, heads bowed in contemplation. One might assume that in such a spiritual place, attention to the body is minimal. Perhaps the monks neglect cleanliness as a sign of asceticism. While extreme cases existed, most monastic communities actually maintained fairly structured hygiene practices. The rule of Saint Benedict, which guided many Western monasteries, contains practical instructions that reflect a concern for health and cleanliness, even as moderation and simplicity were prized. Let us explore a typical Benedictine abbey to see how these devout men, and similarly nuns in convents, handled bathing, washing, and sanitation. Our first stop is the lavatorium or lavabo, usually located in the cloister near the refectory, dining hall. This is a washing area where monks wash their hands before meals, a ritual much like we saw in noble castles, but performed here with sacred gravitas. At the famous Cluny Abbey in France, for instance, There was a large and beautifully carved stone lavabo fed by running water. Monks would line up and, in silence, cleanse their hands as a group before proceeding to eat. Towels hung nearby for drying. At Cluny, records note that towels were changed twice a week, a sign of monastic attention to clean linens. Water in the lavatorium might be changed regularly as well, though in some smaller houses it could be stagnant if not supplied by a spring. Hygiene in monasteries is partly driven by the communal living. Dozens or hundreds of people share quarters, so filth can cause disease in the group, which would disrupt their religious duties. Thus, even without germs theory, they learned to keep certain standards. For example, many monasteries built sophisticated water systems using the engineering knowledge preserved from Roman times or innovated anew. Cistercian monasteries, in particular, 12th century onward, were renowned for clever hydrology. They diverted streams to supply clean water for cooking, washing, and even flushing latrines. Imagine walking behind the monastery's kitchen and seeing a small canal of fresh water flowing through, carrying away kitchen waste and providing water for cleaning pots. The Cistercians often built their abbeys in river valleys, where they could exploit water power and flow. Cleanliness and industry in harmony with nature was part of their ethos. When it comes to bathing, monks live under rules that limit indulgence. Bathing was often seen as a luxury that could incite vanity or temptation. Think of the body's exposure. The rule of St. Benedict doesn't explicitly forbid baths, but it does encourage a general restraint in bodily comforts. Many monastic statutes allowed baths only a few times a year, or when prescribed for health reasons. At Westminster Abbey, we saw that monks were to bathe 4 times a year, likely around Easter, Christmas, and a couple of other feast times. Whether this was strictly followed is debatable, but it was the guideline. Some monastic orders, like the Carthusians, took austerity so far that they reputedly never bathed at all, except maybe the face and hands. Carthusian monks lived in individual cells and aimed for extreme separation from worldly pleasures, and dirt was of little concern to some of them. However, in many abbeys, practicality won out over extreme asceticism. Ill or elderly monks could have baths more often because it was recognized to be beneficial for health and comfort. We might find a bathhouse within the monastery walls. Cluny Abbey, very wealthy and influential, actually had a bathhouse with multiple tubs. There is record of Cluny's abbot granting use of the baths to guests and monks on specified days. Bathing might be done in a modest way, perhaps a monk soaking quietly in a wooden tub with a curtain drawn, or several novices scrubbing in a stream in view of a supervising elder to ensure decorum. They would avoid communal mixed bathing, obviously. Monks and nuns were strictly separate, and even monks among themselves would keep a certain reserve. Bath water might be heated in the infirmary and brought to the cloister's infirmary baths. Monasteries also had infirmaries, like small hospitals, to care for sick monks, and those often prioritized cleanliness. A sick monk might have his linens changed more frequently, his body sponged clean by the infirmarian, the monk in charge of health care. The infirmary would have its own latrines and perhaps bath facility. Cleanliness here was part of healing, echoing the idea cleanliness is next to godliness. Though that phrase came later, the sentiment was present. Let's visit the latrines or necessarium of the monastery, often an impressive structure because it had to accommodate many monks at once in a rather dignified manner. In larger abbeys, the latrine was a long hall, sometimes two-story, built over a flowing stream. The one at Canterbury's Christ Church Priory, for example, was built as a long chamber extending from the dormitory over the town's river. It had stone seating areas and the constant water below to carry waste away. Monks would typically go at set times, for instance, after the morning chapter meeting, in a somewhat organized fashion. Privacy was minimal, but silence was maintained, and one imagines they learned to be matter-of-fact about it. They called these latrines reredorators, the area at the back of the dormitory. At the Cistercian Abbey of Rievaulx in England, the latrine was well engineered, such that it could seat 45 monks at once, with water from a local stream washing the waste out to the river. These constructions show a significant investment in sanitation infrastructure motivated by both practicality and the monastic appreciation of orderliness. Monks wore habits, robes, and beneath them often a tunic or undergarment. Part of hygiene was caring for clothing. Monasteries had laundry schedules. Benedict's rule specifically allows monks to have a change of clothing so that they can wash one set and wear the other, a concession to cleanliness and to avoid the discomfort of dirt. Typically, one monk was assigned as a cellarer or a chamberlain who oversaw clothing and linens. Robes were periodically washed, likely in the monastery's own laundry facilities or by lay brothers, Schitter's servants. If a river ran through the grounds, there may have been a designated spot for washing cloth, perhaps even a mill for fulling, cleaning and thickening cloth with water and clay. Some monks would wash their own small items by hand during their free time on specific days. The rule often mentioned that baths and laundry could be allowed more frequently for those with infirmity or special need, acknowledging that not everyone could adhere to a Spartan regimen. Shaving and hair care were another aspect of monastic hygiene. Monks maintained the tonsure, the shaved circle on the crown, as a sign of their religious devotion. This meant a regular shaving of the head, usually done by a brother appointed as the barber. Many monasteries had a schedule. Perhaps once every couple of weeks, the community had a barbering day. The same goes for beard shaving. In some orders, monks were clean-shaven, requiring frequent use of a razor. We can imagine the scene on a Saturday, monks sitting quietly in turn as a skilled brother shaves their heads with a sharp blade, maybe using water or wine to wet the hair, carefully wiping the blade on a cloth. This was done not just for appearance. A shaved head also conveniently reduces lice and is cooler in hot weather when one has to wear a woolen cowl. The clippings and hair would be cleaned up afterward. You wouldn't want tufts of hair drifting around the cloister. Though monks renounced vanity, personal grooming still had some place. They trimmed their nails. Long, dirty nails would both look bad and harbor dirt that could make them sick when they eat. Remember, forks were rare even in monasteries, so they ate with fingers like others, meaning hand hygiene was vital. An abbey might include admonitions about keeping nails trimmed and hands washed. Similarly, some monks used a tooth cleaning routine too, maybe not every day, but there are references to rinsing the mouth and cleaning teeth as part of morning washing. Now, turning to nunneries, the story is parallel. Nuns, especially in well-funded convents, had bathing and washing routines. Some accounts mention nuns being allowed to bathe more often than monks, perhaps an acknowledgement of women's particular hygienic needs, like washing during menstruation, which was a concern in medieval thought. The idea of modesty was strong, so nuns would bathe privately or in pairs in secluded areas. They also shaved their hair when taking vows, often cutting it short and covering with a veil thereafter, which reduced hair washing needs, but they still would keep scalp and face clean. Convents often had similar latrine setups and lavatories for hand washing. One charming detail from a 12th century convent is a note that the nuns had a warmed bath ready for a certain abbess when she returned from a long journey, implying that even in strict orders, a warm welcome could literally involve warm water and a bath to refresh someone. They understood the value of cleanliness in restoring the spirit as well as the body. Monastic rules sometimes specifically mention not to fuss too much about appearances. For example, a monk should not be distressed if his robe is old or patched, or if his neighbor at table smells of work. But at the same time, the communal nature demanded that no one become a source of real uncleanliness that would bother others. If a monk became a hermit out in the wild, he might forgo washing entirely as a form of penance. Some did, and gained a reputation for holiness through suffering physical squalor, like we'll see with certain saints. But inside the monastery, balance was key. Enough cleaning to maintain health and comfort, but not so much pampering as to distract from prayer or encourage pride. It's dawn in our imagined abbey, and the bell rings for prime, the early morning prayer service. The monks rise from their dormitory, where they all sleep in rows of simple beds, and some quickly splash water on their faces from a communal wash basin to wake up. They put on their cleanish habits, laundered perhaps last week, and file to the church. After prime, they will have a light breakfast, then a work period where some will tend the gardens, some copy manuscripts, and others might engage in cleaning tasks. Perhaps one monk heads to the herb garden to gather lavender and hyssop to replenish the herb strewing in the corridors. Another goes to check the latrine water flow to ensure no blockage. Maintenance of cleanliness is a daily part of monastic labor, considered just as much a service to God as illuminating a manuscript. Indeed, medieval people often linked physical cleanliness and spiritual purity metaphorically. Monks singing psalms would chant verses about washing away sins, and simultaneously they appreciated the literal feeling of being washed. They even likened Christ's salvation to a kind of cleansing bath for the soul. This resonance likely encouraged them to value washing as not only a bodily need, but a mild spiritual exercise in humility and care. As we leave the quiet, orderly monastery, we've gained insight into a community that, while sometimes idealizing the denial of bodily comforts, still recognized the geese need for hygiene in a world full of dirt and disease. The monks found ways to incorporate cleanliness into their routines without letting it become an indulgence. It is a lesson in balance, one that sometimes the outside world lacked. Now, having seen personal and communal hygiene across different social spheres, it's time to consider the broader understanding of health in the medieval mind. How did people connect cleanliness to illness? What theories did doctors have about bathing or dirt? In the next chapter, we will delve into medical theories and health practices related to hygiene, bridging the gap between daily habits and learned advice of the time. Chapter 6: Health is Medicine and Theories of Cleanliness. In the flickering light of a university medical lecture hall in, say, 13th century Salerno or 14th century Paris, a learned physician addresses a small group of students. The topic today is the regimen of health, how to live well and avoid illness. Medieval medicine, grounded in the ancient Greek theories of humors and the belief in miasmas, bad airs, had quite a bit to say about hygiene. Though lacking modern science, these doctors and scholars often advocated for cleanliness in various forms as a way to maintain balance and prevent disease. Let us explore what medieval medical thought taught about bathing, cleanliness, dirt, and disease. One of the key frameworks was the theory of the four humors, inherited from Hippocrates and Galen. The body was thought to contain four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was a matter of these humors being in balance. Illness arose if they were imbalanced or corrupted. How does this relate to cleanliness? Well, sweat and excretions were seen as waste products of digestion and metabolic processes. For instance, medieval physicians wrote that after food is digested, residues, waste of the third digestion, are expelled through pores as sweat. If those wastes linger on or under the skin, they could supposedly cause health problems like skin eruptions or fevers. Therefore, bathing could help by removing these external wastes and even drawing out internal ones. A clean skin meant the body could effectively eliminate what it needed to. Medical texts often included chapters on baths. A famous example is the Secreta Secretorum, Secret of Secrets, a widely read 12th century treatise which gave detailed advice on when and how to bathe. It warned that bathing too long could weaken the heart and cause fatness by relaxing the body too much. It advised that some seasons were better for bathing, spring and winter, but bathing in the height of summer heat could be dangerous, perhaps because of risk of overheating or because warm weather already opened the pores. In essence, doctors wanted moderation. Bathe enough to stay healthy, but not so much that you overindulge or expose yourself unduly. The Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, a popular medieval Latin poem from the School of Salerno giving health tips, had lines about cleanliness. Translated, it admonishes to keep the body clean, wash hands and face often, and maintain good hygiene to avoid ills through pores. In other words, blockages or poisons entering through the skin. Medieval doctors also believed that bad smells carried disease, the miasma theory. Foul odors from refuse, swamps, or unclean bodies were thought to corrupt the air and thereby harm the humors in one's body when breathed in. During the Black Death in the 14th century, one common preventative advice was to avoid bathing because they thought opening the pores might let plague poison in. However, outside of such extreme times, many medical authorities recommended good hygiene to keep those miasmas at bay. They encouraged cleaning streets and removing rotting matter to protect public health. City councils, often influenced by such advice, tried to regulate waste disposal, partly with health in mind. An Italian health official might cite Aristotle or Avicenna on the need for pure air and then decree that tanners or butchers move their stinking operations outside city walls. We should imagine a physician examining a patient with a mysterious rash or fever. He might ask, "Have you bathed recently? Did you wash after sweating from work?" If the patient says no, the physician could very well attribute some of the sickness to an accumulation of waste and recommend a bath with certain herbs to restore balance. Bathing was also prescribed for specific ailments, warm baths to relieve muscle pains, or cold and wet diseases. In humoral terms, a hot bath counters coldness in the body. Mineral baths at spas for arthritis or skin conditions. Even sweat baths, like a primitive sauna, to expel toxins through induced perspiration. On the other hand, if someone was weak or had a heart condition, doctors might caution against bathing because it could strain them, particularly hot baths, which cause heartbeat changes. Beyond bathing, diet and cleanliness went hand in hand in medical advice. Dirty food or impure water was recognized to cause illness. They might call it spoilt humors rather than bacteria, but they knew the effect. So medical guides advised boiling water if the source was suspect, or drinking wine instead of water in cities, because wine was considered purer. They recommended washing vegetables and not eating fruit that had fallen in dirt. The concept of contagion was poorly understood, but some forward thinkers like Ibn Sina, Avicenna, in the Islamic world had inklings that diseases could pass through contact and advised isolation and cleanliness in plagues. When it came to wound care, cleanliness was crucial. Medieval surgeons often cleaned wounds with wine, not because they knew of alcohol's antiseptic properties scientifically, but through empirical observation that wounds washed with wine fared better. Wine helped disinfect. They would trim away dirty flesh, keep wounds clean of outside dirt, and bandage with clean, sometimes boiled, linens. A famous surgical text by Guy de Chauliac in the 14th century emphasizes keeping wounds clean and dry. So even in an era with no concept of microbes, the practical connection between cleanliness and healing was apparent to many healers. There were also curious false beliefs. For example, some thought that if you did not wash and your skin stayed grimy, that layer of dirt might protect you from bad airs or chilling drafts. After the Black Death, as we mentioned, some took to more rarely bathing for fear of exposing themselves. By the 15th century, a new fear had emerged among certain physicians, that bathing, especially in public baths, could open you to syphilis or other diseases. While they didn't understand germ transmission, they correlated the decline of health with certain bathing practices. This unfortunately contributed to a downturns in public hygiene post-medieval period. However, our focus is medieval times, where mostly the attitude was that cleanliness was beneficial within reason. Medical faculty in places like Montpellier or Bologna compiled lengthy lists of bathing rules. For example, don't bathe on a full stomach. You should be slightly hungry, otherwise you might get indigestion or faint. Don't bathe right after a heavy meal, just as mothers tell kids not to swim after eating. Medieval docs had a similar thought. They also said not to bathe when extremely tired or right after sexual activity, to not weaken the body further. Ideally, a person would take a light meal, rest, then bathe, and afterwards have a nourishing snack and rest again. Bathhouses even served light foods for this reason. The interplay of religion and medicine also colored ideas of cleanliness. The church taught the cleansing of sin through baptism and confession metaphorically, but churchmen also ran hospitals and could impose hygiene in those settings. Many monastic infirmaries insisted on washing patients, shaving them if they had surgery. They knew hair could infect wounds, etc. If a pilgrim arrived filthy at a hospital, part of the charity was often to give them a bath, clean clothes, and delouse them. Some orders specialized in care of lepers and insisted on careful washing and maintenance of sores. A compelling example is the Order of the Hospital of St. John, Hospitallers, in the Crusader states. Their hospital in Jerusalem, around 12th century, reportedly bathed patients, changed their linens frequently, and kept the wards relatively clean. A compassionate practice that likely improved outcomes, at least by reducing secondary infections. Similarly, the city of Milan during the plague of 1348 had an ordinance to scour and wash the streets and houses of the sick, perhaps one reason Milan had fewer casualties, along with strict quarantines. Let's imagine a conversation between a patient and a physician in a medieval city. The patient complains of persistent headaches and sluggishness. The doctor might say, your complexion meaning your humor balance, is disturbed, perhaps an excess of melancholy, black bile, that needs relief. I advise taking the steam bath and then a gentle bleeding. Steam baths, sweat baths, were a form of intense cleaning, making the patient sweat out impurities. Indeed, one cure for a cold was to go to a bathhouse, sweat thoroughly, then go to bed to cook out the illness, a bit like how we use saunas or steam for colds now. Another scenario, a pregnant woman is having a difficult time. Some medieval medical advice recommended regular baths or foot soaks for pregnant women to ease their discomfort and improve circulation, but not too hot and not in late pregnancy when it might trigger labor. They recognized the soothing power of warm water to relieve cramps or stress. In cases of mental malaise like melancholy and depression, physicians sometimes prescribed bathing in fragrant waters as a mood enhancer. A famous doctor, Bernard of Gordon, suggested that a depressed person might benefit from a pleasant bath with herbs like marjoram and rose to cheer the spirits, essentially an early spa therapy. Of course, not all healers agreed. There were always conservative voices. Some folk healers or superstitious individuals might claim that bathing too often could wash away protective oils or invite evil in. We have records of certain local traditions that discouraged bathing very young infants for the first week of life, fearing it would weaken them. This is culturally varied. Some places bathed babies immediately as a purification, others delayed. But mainstream medical universities of Europe generally favored cleanliness as part of regimen. Public health edicts, influenced by doctors, addressed urban cleanliness issues, disposal of animal guts after market, cleaning of streets and markets, even early forms of quarantine or isolation of infected houses. The link between dirt and disease might not have been fully understood, but was strongly suspected. They saw plagues follow filth and crowding, even if they wrongly blamed corrupted air rather than fleas or bacteria. So whenever plague hit, cities scrambled to clean up. They burned barrels of aromatic pitch in the streets to purge the air. They removed rotting garbage, sometimes even washed down entire street fronts with lye or vinegar solutions. People carried posies of flowers or wore pomanders, small balls of perfume, to keep foul smells and presumably disease away, which, though ineffective medically, gave comfort and a pleasant personal scent at least. One cannot help but feel sympathy for these medieval thinkers trying to ward off catastrophic disease with the limited tools they had. Cleanliness and pleasant smells were among their best tools. It wasn't entirely futile. Better sanitation did help reduce some infections and parasites. Washing hands likely prevented some spread of disease at times, though they didn't formally know to do it systematically. The practice of hand washing before eating did inadvertently remove germs often. So in summary, the medieval medical world generally endorsed hygiene as beneficial. Clean body, clean air, and clean surroundings equated to better health, with prudent caution not to overdo or do it at the wrong times. It's a balance reflective of their whole approach to life, moderation in all things. Having considered the advice of doctors and the efforts to stay healthy, our journey through medieval hygiene is nearly complete. But there remains one more intriguing facet: the intersection of hygiene with religious attitudes and the extremes of piety. We have seen how monasteries managed cleanliness, but beyond organized rules, some individual saints and devotees had unique relationships with dirt and cleanliness for spiritual reasons. In our next chapter, we will explore how faith and beliefs impacted hygiene, from the devout saint who never bathed to the devout layperson who equated physical cleanliness with moral virtue. This will round out our picture of medieval hygiene by showing its cultural and spiritual dimensions. Chapter 7: Faith and Filth, Religion's Influence on Hygiene. As a bell tolls faintly in the distance, we find ourselves in a small chapel lit by candles. Here lies the tomb of a revered saint, a woman who lived in the 13th century and was famed for her extreme piety. Pilgrims whisper about her miracles, but also about an unusual aspect of her life. She severely mortified her flesh, rarely if ever washing, allowing herself to be coated in dirt and lice as a sign of humility and devotion to God. How curious it is that in an age when most people did try to clean themselves, when possible, some of the holiest figures deliberately embraced filth. To truly understand medieval attitudes toward hygiene, we must delve into the complex role of religious beliefs. How virtue, sin, and purity were perceived to relate to the cleanliness or uncleanliness of the body. Let us begin with the example of Saint Catherine of Siena. Catherine, a 14th century mystic, once felt great guilt for having succumbed in her youth to her mother's wishes to dress attractively and wash regularly to appear presentable to suitors. Later, in her intense religious fervor, she considered even basic self-care as potential vanity. It's recorded that she intentionally avoided bathing and even prayed for and rejoiced in having an illness that made her body smell foul, a way to deter any admirers and fully devote herself to God. She saw her unwashed, emaciated state as a living penance and a means to spiritual purity by renouncing fleshly comfort. Though extreme, such cases were lauded by some church chroniclers as heroic sanctity, overcoming the natural human desire for cleanliness and pleasure for the love of God. Another famous case, Saint Francis of Assisi and his early followers often eschewed washing and fine clothes, embracing poverty. Francis at times deliberately wore tattered, dirty garments and did not shrink from filth, even famously embracing lepers, whose disease made them and their lesions extremely unclean by medieval standards. To Francis, true spiritual brotherhood meant transcending disgust and loving those in the worst condition. By humbling himself to filth, he imitated Christ's humility. The early Franciscan ethos valued simplicity and was suspicious of anything that smacked of luxury. Frequent bathing could be seen as such if done for pleasure or vanity. Consider also Saint Margaret of Hungary, a 13th century princess turned nun. Chronicles say she refused to wash her hair, letting it become matted and vermin-infested, so that the biting of fleas and lice would add to her ascetic sufferings. She believed these little torments kept her mindful of Christ's crown of thorns and the need to subdue bodily desires. Her royal father had built her a beautiful convent with all conveniences, but she chose the hardest, most austere life within it. To her, a clean, perfumed body might tempt one to pride or worldly thoughts. A dirty, itchy body anchored her in constant penance. Another astonishing tale comes from after the martyrdom of St. Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury. When preparing his body for burial in 1170, the monks discovered that beneath his rich ecclesiastical garments he wore a hair shirt crawling with lice, and his flesh bore the marks of never being washed or changed for long periods. They took it as a sign of his holiness. He secretly practiced self-mortification while outwardly a grand church leader. Those biting lice were interpreted as a form of martyrdom, or at least ascetic discipline he endured daily. Those stories were propagated precisely because they were atypical and astounding. They painted these saints as extraordinary souls who could embrace what everyone else found repulsive. Importantly, medieval people did not see these behavior as instructions for everyone. They were exceptional, almost superhuman acts of piety. In fact, normal folks and even other clergy often found such extremes off-putting. Yet they admired the dedication behind them. The very shock value of a noblewoman turned saint rejoicing in body odor was a testament to her sanctity. She had conquered the natural human inclination for cleanliness and comfort. The church's official stance on everyday hygiene was not against it. Many clergy bathed and kept clean like anyone else. Monks we saw had rules for scheduled baths. Parish priests likely washed regularly enough to not offend their flocks when giving communion. Cleanliness could also be associated with spiritual purity in positive ways. Baptism, the fundamental Christian rite, is a washing, symbolizing the cleansing of sin. In church liturgy, there's a moment where the priest washes his hands and prays, Lavabo inter, innocentes manos meas. I will wash my hands among the innocent, before handling the Eucharist, signifying that he should be clean of sin and reverently clean physically too when touching holy things. So physical washing carries sacred symbolism of inner cleansing. There's also the idea of pilgrimage, Pilgrims often undertook long journeys, and reaching a holy site, they might wash themselves in a river or fountain near the shrine as a purificatory act. For instance, English pilgrims going to Canterbury might stop at the Black Prince's Well to wash before entering the holy precincts, somewhat akin to how other religions have ritual ablutions. In Islam, which medieval Christians observed during the Crusades, the 5 daily prayers are preceded by washing of hands, feet, and face, wudu. This fascinated and sometimes confused Christians who encountered it. Some crusaders came to respect Muslim cleanliness and even adopt habits like frequent baths or perfuming. Others, however, derided it as vanity or effeminacy. There's a telling anecdote. Saladin, the Muslim leader, once sent the gift of a bath and expensive robes to a captured Christian noble to allow him to cleanse himself, as the man stank after long captivity. It was both a humane gesture and a subtle lesson in the importance of cleanliness. Cultural contrasts existed. Moorish Spain and the Mediterranean generally had more inherited Roman and Arab bathing culture. Public baths, hammams, were common in cities like Cordoba or Palermo. Christians living there often participated, but in more isolated northern Europe, such elaborate bath culture was less, revived only slowly in medieval towns. So to some northern moralists, the frequent bathing by Andalusians, or even by Jews, who had mikvahs and ritual washings, looked suspicious, either as potential decadence or as something foreign. Over time, though, these influences helped Europe as a whole reclaim the bath tradition by the 13th to 14th century until the later backlash. The church occasionally voiced concerns about bathhouses, not because of bathing per se, but because of the promiscuity and prostitution that sometimes happened there. For example, in the 13th century, a council in Paris tried to forbid clergies from going to public baths, fearing it led to sin. Bathhouse owners might also be warned not to allow scandalous behavior, but there was no doctrine that being clean was ungodly. St. Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian, wrote that cleanliness and care of the body are in themselves good, as long as they are directed to proper ends, health, honorable appearance, and not to vanity or lust. For regular devout lay people, there was often a balance. They might consider it a virtue to be modest and not overly concerned with primping, but they also wouldn't want to stink and drive others away. That could be seen as inconsiderate, or even a sign of sloth. One of the 7 deadly sins is sloth/asadius, and failing to keep oneself reasonably clean and presentable, thereby neglecting one's duties, could fall under that in extreme cases. Late medieval books of etiquette, written for bourgeois or aristocratic readers, often have a pious tone, advising to wash and wear clean clothes because it honors the Creator to care for the body He gave you, and it shows respect for neighbors. That said, some flagellant movements or radical penitent groups in times of crisis, like during plagues, embraced dirt as a badge of holiness. They reasoned Nineveh was saved when its citizens donned sackcloth and ashes, essentially making themselves filthy in repentance, a biblical model for turning away divine wrath. So when plague hit, some extreme penitents would cover themselves in dirt and ash, wear rough, filthy clothing, and refuse to wash as they paraded through towns, whipping themselves to atone for sin. It was a dramatic, desperate appeal to God, very much using filth as a symbol of humility. and mourning for sin. For the everyday poor, some religious comfort could be found in the idea that dirt and hard work were part of the holy order of things, the labor of Adam after the fall. Church sermons and writings sometimes praise the honest laborer despite his dirty appearance, saying God sees the purity of his heart under the dirt of his brow. Conversely, they warned the rich against despising the poor for their smell or grime, reminding them that Christ often appeared in the guise of the poor, and that inner virtue matters more than outward cleanliness. Still, churches would sprinkle holy water on congregants, a ritual cleaning, and incense the assembly, partly spiritual, partly to literally freshen the air in a packed, maybe smelly, nave. One interesting religious practice is the washing of feet on Holy Thursday, Maundy Thursday, imitating Christ washing his disciples' feet at the Last Supper. Medieval kings and nobles often participated in this rite, washing the feet of a dozen poor people on that day, and then giving them food or alms. This symbolic act conveyed humility and charity. The highest in society kneels to wash the lowest, reminding all that before God we are equal and must serve one another. It also implicitly acknowledged the real state of those feet, often dirty and travel-worn, and showed that caring for physical needs of the poor was a Christian duty. After washing, they would kiss the feet as Christ did. While highly symbolic, it nonetheless was a genuine moment of hygiene service, extended by the powerful to the needy, and many poor likely appreciated the actual foot washing as well as the charity. In summary, religion in the Middle Ages cast a complex light on hygiene. Cleanliness had moral connotations. It could symbolize purity, but seeking it too eagerly could indicate vanity or moral uncleanness inside. Dirt could symbolize sin or humility depending on context. A sinner covered in sins, or a penitent humbling himself. Most people navigated this pragmatically, staying reasonably clean but not flaunting luxury in it, and admiring saints who, by special calling, went unclean as a form of spiritual heroism. As night falls on our historical journey, think of a devout medieval farmer saying his bedtime prayers, his face and hands washed from the day's toil, but his nails still with some soil, and his hair perhaps smelling of the fields. He thanks God for enough water to wash, for health, and prays to be made clean in heart. He likely doesn't dwell too much on the extremes of saintly filth or the indulgences of the rich. He just knows that a good wash makes him feel better and fit for prayer. In his worldview, God is concerned with how he treats others and keeps his soul, but God also provides the stream to bathe in, so it must be a wholesome thing. This gentle integration of daily life, health, and faith brings us to the end of our journey. We have wandered from muddy streets to scented baths, from barber surgeons' chairs to cloistered abbeys, from the high table of a castle to the humblest peasant's hut. At every step, we've seen medieval folk grappling with the same basic needs we have: to be clean, to be healthy, to live decently among others, and sometimes to sacrifice comfort for higher ideals. Conclusion: a gentle nightfall over the medieval world. Our long voyage through time draws to a close. Twilight settles upon the medieval landscape. The busy city streets grow quiet as people close up shops and toss out the last dishwater. The countryside dims with only hearth smoke curling from village cottages. The castle's torches are lit, while servants finish the day's chores, and monks chant their final prayers in the abbey before an early rest. In this calm dusk, we reflect on what hygiene was like in medieval times, not with judgment from our modern standpoint, but with understanding and even admiration for how people managed with what they had. It was an age without running water or scientific germ theory, yet men and women strove to keep themselves and their homes clean according to the knowledge and means available. We discovered that the medieval world was not uniformly filthy, as popular myth might suggest. Far from it, there was a rich culture of cleanliness woven into daily life. People started their days washing hands and faces with cold well water, combing their hair to remove pests. They valued baths and took them when they could, luxuriating in warm water, scented with herbs, whether in a peasant's wooden tub by the fire or a lord's curtained bath brought to his chamber. Public bathhouses turned bathing into a social delight, complete with conversation and relaxation, until changing times dimmed their lights. We saw that teeth were cared for with chewed twigs and minty powders. Laundry was labored over by countless washerwomen, beating clothes in streams and tubs. And even city councils wrestled with waste disposal to keep streets livable. Medieval cities, though often dirty by necessity, organized rudimentary garbage collection and maintained fresh water fountains to mitigate the grime of dense habitation. Rural folk lived closer to nature's rhythms, using the land and sun to cleanse waste and the river to wash away sweat, their lives perhaps muddy, but in some ways more naturally clean, with sweet breezes carrying the day's smells away at dusk. In splendid castles, we observed how nobility leveraged resources and servants to create pockets of cleanliness and comfort. Multi-room latrines with flowing water, perfumed halls strewn with herbs, personal barbers and bath attendants, ensuring the lord and lady felt fresh and dignified. Castles could be both refined and rough, fine basins of rosewater at dinner, yet the ever-present need to guard robes from fleas in the garderobe or smoke out the bedbugs in heavy draperies. Within monastery walls, the pursuit of spiritual purity went hand in hand with practical hygiene. Monks lined up to wash in silence, tended complicated latrine systems with diligence, and allowed themselves a few annual baths, enough to stay healthy but few enough to preserve their ascetic focus. Their chants and prayers were carried out in clean cloisters, demonstrating that one could care for soul and body without conflict. From the pages of medical manuscripts, we heard voices of learned physicians urging regular washing and balanced living for health, at times of plague calling for cleaner streets and purer air. They lacked microscopes, yet intuitively connected dirt with disease and fragrance with well-being. In an era of devastating epidemics, these early health measures, washing, airing, bathing, avoiding foulness, offered some protection and comfort, modest foreshadowings of the hygienic principles we hold today. And we encountered the paradox of faith, where a few extraordinary individuals rejected physical cleanliness as a form of devotion, while the broader culture still equated water with spiritual renewal and demanded basic cleanliness out of charity and respect. Medieval people were deeply religious, and that gave a moral dimension to cleanliness. To care for one's body was to honor God's creation, To wash the feet of the weary was to imitate Christ's love, and occasionally to forego bathing was to bear a cross of humble suffering. These perspectives infused even the simplest wash basin with meaning beyond the physical. Now, as night fully falls, imagine one last scene. A medieval family in a small village prepares for bed. By candlelight, the mother takes a damp cloth and gently wipes the dirt from her children's faces and hands. They giggle because the water is cool and it tickles. She shakes out their little shirts, hoping to dislodge any fleas before sleep. The father stirs the embers of the fire to keep the room warm and smoke drifting upward. Perhaps it will chase mosquitoes from the rafters. They say their prayers, may God keep us safe and sound, and settle on their straw-filled mattresses. Outside, crickets chirp and a soft wind rustles the trees. The day's labor is washed away as well as it could be. They feel the small relief of clean skin against linen, and it soothes them into slumber. From our vantage, centuries later, we know much that they did not. We know about bacteria, about the true causes of plague, about effective sanitation infrastructure. Yet their lives were not devoid of wisdom in the art of living cleanly and healthily. They used herbs as deodorizers, ashes and urine as detergents, linens as filters, and sun and water as their allies. They cherished good smells as signs of goodness and cringed at foul smells as warnings of danger or corruption. In essence, medieval folk had a concept of cleanliness that was both practical and symbolic. It was about comfort and health, but also about order, respect, and even godliness. As you drift to sleep, let the impressions of this journey settle softly. Imagine the dim glow of lantern light on medieval streets, recently sprinkled with water to lay the dust, the quiet of a bathhouse after patrons have gone, water cooling and scented air fading, the rhythmic sound of a monk's sandals as he walks from the lavabo with dripping hands, and the sigh of a weary farmer sinking into a brief, humble wash at day's end. These gentle human moments connect us across time. The world then was harsher in many ways, but people found their small pleasures and dignity in being clean when they could, just as we do. In knowing their routines, we can almost feel the cool morning water on our own face, smell the lavender in their linens, and hear the faint echoes of a lullaby sung by a mother combing her daughter's hair by the hearth. It's a reminder that through all the changes of history, the desire for cleanliness and comfort in our daily lives is a constant, a simple and universal part of the human story. So now, as you close your eyes, think of a calm medieval night. All is still save the distant sound of a town crier calling the hour. In a loft above a barn, a peasant family sleeps soundly, the father's hand still faintly scented with the mint he crushed for his teeth, the baby wrapped in a freshly washed cloth. In a monastery, the monks rest, their robes aired and bodies modestly clean, a candle left burning before the altar. In a castle, the lord and lady retire to a bed, with sheets changed that very day, drifting into dreams perhaps of summer rose gardens. Medieval Europe sleeps, not in squalor as one might think, but largely clean and content by its own standards, ready to greet the next day's tasks anew. May your sleep be as peaceful and restorative as theirs, and may the cares of the day be rinsed away, leaving you in a state of calm, gentle repose. In the end, no matter the century, There is solace in the routine of washing away the day and lying down to rest, knowing one has done their best to live wholesomely. Thus ends our journey through the winding paths of history, a slow, thoughtful walk alongside those who came before, learning how they strove to be healthy and clean, how they found meaning even in a bowl of water and a bar of soap or lump of lye. In our imagination, we dim the lanterns across medieval towns and villages one by one. The knowledge and experiences we've gathered settle in us quietly. The story of medieval hygiene, far from being merely about dirt or soap, has revealed itself as a tapestry connecting body and soul, community and individual, past and present. With that rich tapestry wrapped gently around us, we can now rest. The final candle is snuffed, and darkness brings dreams of old bathhouses, fragrant herbs, and tranquil moonlit wells. Sleep now carried on the thought that even in the Middle Ages people ended their day by washing, sighing with relief, and surrendering to sweet sleep, just as you do tonight. Good night.